The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the sprawling estate of Evergreen Manor, its opulent grounds a stark contrast to the sweat-drenched figure toiling in the garden. Amelia Foster, a petite woman with kind eyes and calloused hands, wiped her brow as she tended to the vibrant roses that adorned the entrance. At 32, her face bore the lines of a life filled with hardship, yet her gentle smile never wavered. "Foster!" The sharp voice of Carlton Blackwood, the estate's wealthy owner, cut through the air like a whip. "I thought I told you to have these hedges trimmed by noon. It's nearly 2, and they look like a jungle." Amelia straightened, her bones aching from hours of labor. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Blackwood. I was just finishing up the..." "Excuses!" Carlton sneered, his designer suit pristine despite the heat. "That's all I ever hear from you. Do you think I pay you to make excuses?" "No, sir," Amelia replied softly, her eyes downcast. "I'll get to the hedges right away." Carlton's lip curled in disgust. "See that you do. And when you're done, the marble in the foyer needs polishing. I want to see my reflection in it by dinner time." As he turned to leave, his foot caught on the handle of Amelia's watering can. With a startled cry, he stumbled, arms flailing, before landing face first in a freshly mulched flower bed. Gasping, Amelia rushed to help him. "Mr. Blackwood! Are you all right?" Carlton pushed himself up, his once immaculate suit now stained with dirt and fragments of bark. His eyes blazed with fury as he glared at Amelia. "You clumsy fool! Look what you've done!" "I'm so sorry, sir. It was an accident. Let me help you." "Don't touch me!" Carlton snarled, slapping away her outstretched hand. "This suit costs more than you make in a year. You'll pay for this, Foster. Every cent." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes as she watched her employer storm towards the mansion, leaving a trail of mud and curses in his wake. She knew the cost would indeed come out of her meager salary, but what pained her most was the sheer contempt in Carlton's eyes. No matter how hard she tried, she could never seem to earn his respect. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Amelia worked tirelessly to complete her tasks. Her muscles screamed for rest, but she pressed on, knowing that any slip in her duties would only bring more of Carlton's wrath. It was well past midnight when she finally trudged to her tiny room in the servants' quarters, her body aching and her spirit heavy. Collapsing onto her narrow bed, Amelia reached for the worn photograph on her nightstand. The smiling faces of her parents beamed back at her, a bittersweet reminder of happier times. "I miss you both so much," she whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I hope I'm making you proud." Little did Amelia know that her life was about to change forever, set in motion by a chance encounter that would rock the very foundations of Evergreen Manor. The next morning dawned bright and clear, but for Amelia, it held the promise of another day filled with grueling work and harsh words. As she made her way to the kitchen to begin preparing breakfast for the Blackwood family, she overheard hushed voices coming from the study. "Are you sure about this, darling?" The silky voice of Vivian Blackwood, Carlton's wife, drifted through the crack in the door. "It seems rather extreme." Carlton's reply was cold and calculated. "Of course I'm sure. That fool Harrison is sitting on a gold mine, and he doesn't even know it. Once we acquire his land, we'll be able to develop it into the most exclusive resort this side of the Mississippi. We'll be billionaires, Vivian." "But what about his family? I heard they've owned that farm for generations." A harsh laugh. "Sentimentality is for the weak, my dear. Business is business. Besides, once he sees the numbers we're offering, he'd be a fool to refuse." Amelia's heart raced as she listened. She knew of the Harrison family, kind, hardworking people who ran the local organic farm that supplied much of the town's produce. The thought of them losing their livelihood to Carlton's greed made her stomach churn. As she turned to leave, her elbow knocked against a vase, sending it crashing to the floor. The study door flew open, revealing Carlton's thunderous face. "Foster! Were you eavesdropping?" Amelia trembled. "And no, sir. I was just passing by to start breakfast." "Liar!" Carlton grabbed her arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "What did you hear? Tell me." "Nothing, I swear." Amelia pleaded, tears springing to her eyes. Carlton's face twisted with rage. "I've had enough of your incompetence. You're fired. Get out of my house this instant." "Please, Mr. Blackwood," Amelia begged. "This job is all I have. I have nowhere else to go." "That's not my problem," Carlton sneered, dragging her towards the front door. "Consider yourself lucky I don't call the police for your snooping." With a final shove, Amelia found herself on the mansion steps, the door slamming behind her. Rain began to fall, mixing with her tears as she clutched her meager possessions to her chest. As she stumbled down the long driveway, her mind raced. Where would she go? How would she survive? And what about the Harrisons? Could she stand by and let Carlton ruin their lives? A car horn blared, snapping Amelia out of her thoughts. She looked up to see a battered pickup truck pulling to a stop beside her. The window rolled down, revealing the weathered face of old Joe, the town's handyman. "Amelia? Good Lord, child, what happened to you?" Through her sobs, Amelia recounted her sudden dismissal. Joe's kind eyes filled with concern. "You poor thing. Hop in, you can stay with me and the missus until you get back on your feet." As Amelia climbed into the truck, a seed of determination took root in her heart. She may have lost her job, but she hadn't lost her integrity. Somehow, she would find a way to help the Harrisons and expose Carlton's nefarious plans. Little did she know that her journey was just beginning, and that fate had a few surprises in store, not just for her, but for the man who had so cruelly cast her aside. The following weeks were a whirlwind for Amelia. Joe and his wife, Martha, welcomed her into their modest home with open arms, providing her with not just shelter, but the warmth of family she had been missing for so long. "You're like the daughter we never had," Martha would say, her eyes twinkling as she served Amelia another helping of her famous apple pie. Despite the comfort of her new surroundings, Amelia couldn't shake the gnawing worry about the Harrisons and Carlton's scheme. She confided in Joe, who listened with a furrowed brow. "That Blackwood's been trying to get his hands on the Harrison place for years," Joe mused. "But without proof of any wrongdoing, there's not much we can do." Amelia's mind raced. What if I could get that proof? And so began Amelia's covert mission. Using the skills she had honed during her years of service, she began to investigate Carlton's business dealings. She pored over public records, eavesdropped on conversations at the country club where she had taken a part-time job as a waitress, and slowly began to piece together the extent of Carlton's corruption. It was during one of her shifts at the club that Amelia's path crossed with a man who would change everything. She was clearing a table when a deep, kindly voice caught her attention. "Excuse me, miss. Could I trouble you for a glass of water?" Amelia turned to find herself face to face with an older gentleman, his silver hair neatly combed and his eyes twinkling with warmth behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Of course, sir," she replied with a smile. As she set down the water, the man's gaze lingered on her face. "I hope you don't mind me saying, but you seem familiar. Have we met before?" Amelia shook her head. "I don't believe so, sir. I'm quite new to the club." The man nodded thoughtfully. "My mistake, then. Thank you for the water, Miss Foster," Amelia supplied. "Amelia Foster. The man's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition passing over his face. Foster, you say? How interesting. Tell me, Amelia, did you by any chance grow up in Millbrook? Surprised, Amelia nodded. Yes, I did. How did you know? The man's smile grew wider. My dear, I think we have much to discuss. Would you be willing to meet me after your shift? I have a story that I believe you'll find most intriguing. Curiosity piqued, Amelia agreed. As the man left, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change once again. Later that evening, Amelia found herself sitting across from the mysterious gentleman in a quiet corner of the club's terrace. He introduced himself as Theodore Maxwell, a retired judge and, as it turned out, an old friend of her parents. Your father and I went to law school together, Theodore explained, his eyes misting with nostalgia. James Foster was one of the brightest minds I've ever known. When he chose to leave his promising career to start that little bookshop with your mother, many thought he was crazy. But he always said that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the love we share and the lives we touch. Amelia's heart swelled with pride and a bittersweet ache. I had no idea. They died when I was very young. I don't remember much about them. Theodore reached across the table, patting her hand gently. They were wonderful people, Amelia. And they loved you more than anything in this world. Which is why what I'm about to tell you is going to come as quite a shock. Over the next hour, Theodore unfolded a tale that left Amelia reeling. Her parents, it seemed, had been far more than simple bookshop owners. They had been working undercover, gathering evidence on a network of corrupt businessmen who were exploiting the town's resources and people. Your father was close to exposing the whole operation when... Theodore's voice faltered. Well, when the accident happened. Amelia's mind whirled. Are you saying their deaths weren't an accident? Theodore's grim expression was all the answer she needed. We could never prove it, but I always suspected foul play. The case went cold, and the corrupt network continued to thrive. In fact, I believe it's still operating today, with new players but the same old tricks. As the pieces began to fall into place, Amelia felt a surge of determination. Mr. Maxwell, I think I might know who's behind it all now. A man named Carlton Blackwood. Theodore's sharp intake of breath cut her off. Blackwood? My dear girl, do you know who Carlton Blackwood really is? Amelia shook her head, confused. Carlton Blackwood, Theodore said slowly, is your uncle. Your mother's brother. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Amelia processed this bombshell. Her uncle? The man who had treated her with nothing but contempt for years was her own flesh and blood? But why? She stammered. Why would he keep this from me? Why treat me so horribly? Theodore's eyes were full of sorrow. I'm afraid the answer to that question lies in a web of greed, jealousy, and dark family secrets. Carlton always resented your mother for inheriting the bulk of your grandparents' estate. When she died, he should have become your guardian, but instead, I ended up in foster care, Amelia finished, her voice barely a whisper. Theodore nodded. I tried to find you, to tell you the truth, but Carlton had covered his tracks well. It wasn't until I saw you today that I realized who you were. You have your mother's eyes, you know. As the full weight of Theodore's revelations settled over her, Amelia felt a curious mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a fierce resolve. She may have lost her parents, but their legacy lived on in her. And now, armed with the truth and her own unwavering sense of justice, she was more determined than ever to finish what they had started. Mr. Maxwell, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart, I think it's time we brought Carlton Blackwood and his corrupt empire down. Will you help me? Theodore's eyes sparkled with a fire that belied his age. "My dear Amelia, I thought you'd never ask." As they began to formulate their plan, neither Amelia nor Theodore could have imagined the explosive chain of events they were about to set in motion, events that would shake the very foundations of Millbrook and force long-buried secrets into the light of day. The stage was set for a showdown that would test Amelia's strength, challenge her convictions, and ultimately reveal the true power of humility in the face of overwhelming odds. For in the end, it would not be wealth or status that determined the victor, but the strength of one's character and the purity of one's heart. Days turned into weeks as Amelia, with Theodore's guidance, delved deeper into the tangled web of corruption that had ensnared Millbrook. They worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, following paper trails, and slowly building a case that would expose Carlton Blackwood and his cohorts. All the while, Amelia continued her job at the country club, keenly aware that every interaction, every overheard conversation, could potentially provide a crucial piece of the puzzle. It was during one such shift that fate threw another curveball her way. She was serving drinks at a charity gala when a familiar voice sent a chill down her spine. Well, if it isn't the incompetent Maid." Amelia turned to find herself face to face with Carlton Blackwood, his cold eyes gleaming with malice. On his arm hung a woman Amelia recognized as Vivian, his wife, looking bored and vaguely annoyed. "Mr. Blackwood," Amelia replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "How unexpected to see you here." Carlton sneered. "I could say the same. I'm surprised they let someone of your caliber work at such an establishment. Tell me, have you managed to break any priceless vases lately?" Vivian tittered, a sound as false as her plastic smile. "Oh, Carlton, don't be cruel. I'm sure the girl is doing her best, given her limitations." Amelia felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she held her head high. "I assure you, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, I'm quite capable of performing my duties here. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other guests to attend to." As she turned to leave, Carlton's hand shot out, gripping her arm painfully. "Not so fast," he hissed, his breath hot against her ear. "I don't know how you managed to weasel your way in here, but mark my words, if I catch even a whiff of you causing trouble, I'll make sure you never work in this town again." "Understood?" Amelia met his gaze, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "Crystal clear, sir. Now, please let go of my arm before I'm forced to call security." For a moment, fury flashed across Carlton's face, but then he released her with a dismissive laugh. "As if they'd believe the word of a servant over mine. Run along now, little mouse. And remember, I'm watching you." As Amelia hurried away, her heart pounding, she couldn't shake the feeling that Carlton's threat was more than just empty words. His eyes had held a dangerous glint, one that spoke of secrets and sins buried deep. But rather than cowing her, his intimidation only strengthened her resolve. She was no longer the meek servant girl he could bully, she was her parents' daughter, and she would see justice done. Slipping into a quiet alcove, Amelia took a moment to compose herself. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Mom, Dad, give me strength." When she opened them again, her gaze fell upon a familiar face across the room, Theodore Maxwell, deep in conversation with a distinguished-looking gentleman. Sensing her eyes on him, Theodore glanced up and gave her a subtle nod. It was their prearranged signal. He had found something important. Amelia's pulse quickened with anticipation. As the gala wore on, Amelia moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her tray of champagne flutes a perfect cover for eavesdropping. Snippets of conversation floated around her, business deals, social gossip, and something else. Something that made her blood run cold. Harrison Farm, eminent domain. Blackwood's in bed with the mayor. Amelia's hand trembled, nearly spilling the drinks. This was it, the proof they needed that Carlton was manipulating local officials to seize the Harrison property. But how to document it? Her opportunity came sooner than expected. As she passed by a cluster of men in expensive suits, one of them, flushed with alcohol and bravado, raised his voice. To Carlton Blackwood, he proclaimed, lifting his glass. The man who'll turn that worthless farm into the crown jewel of Millbrook. Amelia's heart raced. Without thinking, she pulled out her phone and, pretending to check a message, hit the record button. For the next few minutes, she hovered nearby, capturing damning statement after damning statement. By the time she walked away, she knew they had struck gold. Later that night, in the safety of Theodore's study, Amelia played back the recording. Theodore's eyes widened with each revelation. "My God," he breathed. "This is even bigger than we thought. Carlton's not just after the Harrison farm, he's planning to reshape the entire town. Luxury resorts, casinos, he'll destroy everything that makes Millbrook special." Amelia nodded grimly. "And he's using his connections to make it all look legal. But now we have proof." Theodore leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Proof is good, my dear, but it's not enough. We need to understand the full scope of his operation. And for that, we need to go to the source." Amelia frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Theodore said, a glimmer in his eye, "it's time you returned to Evergreen Manor." The very thought made Amelia's stomach churn. "But how?" "Carlton fired me, remember?" Theodore's smile was enigmatic. "Leave that to me. I think it's time Carlton Blackwood was reminded of a few old debts." 2 days later, Amelia found herself standing once again at the gates of Evergreen Manor, her heart pounding beneath her crisp uniform. Theodore's plan had worked, a few whispered words in the right ears, a gentle reminder of past indiscretions, and suddenly Carlton Blackwood was all too eager to rehire his former maid. As she walked up the familiar driveway, Amelia steeled herself for what lay ahead. She was no longer the downtrodden servant, she was a woman on a mission, carrying the hopes of her parents and the future of Millbrook on her shoulders. The door swung open before she could knock, revealing Vivian Blackwood's coldly beautiful face. "Ah, the prodigal maid returns," she drawled, her voice dripping with disdain. "I do hope you've learned some competence during your sabbatical." Amelia lowered her eyes, slipping back into the role of the meek servant. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for this second chance." Vivian waved her hand dismissively. "Just don't make us regret it. Now, Carlton wants to see you in his study. Do try not to keep him waiting." As Amelia made her way through the opulent halls, memories flooded back, both bitter and sweet. Here was the corner where she had first overheard Carlton's nefarious plans. There was the window seat where she used to sit during her rare moments of rest, dreaming of a better life. She paused outside Carlton's study, took a deep breath, and knocked. "Enter," came the gruff response. Carlton Blackwood sat behind his massive mahogany desk, every inch the powerful tycoon. But as Amelia stepped into the room, she saw something flicker in his eyes, a moment of uncertainty, quickly masked by his usual arrogance. "Foster," he said, his tone clipped. "I trust you understand the unusual nature of your reinstatement." Amelia nodded, keeping her eyes downcast. "Yes, sir. I'm very grateful for the opportunity." Carlton leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Let's be clear, this is your last chance. One misstep, one hint of trouble, and you're not just fired. You're finished in this town. Understood?" "Perfectly, sir," Amelia replied, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "Good," Carlton nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Now, get to work." "And Foster?" Amelia looked up, meeting his gaze. Remember, I'll be watching you very closely." As Amelia left the study, her mind raced. Carlton's threat was clear, but so was the fear behind it. He knew something was amiss, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. It was a dangerous game she was playing, but one she had to win, for her parents, for the Harrisons, for all of Millbrook. Over the next few weeks, Amelia threw herself into her work with a fervor that surprised even Carlton. She was everywhere, dusting, polishing, serving, always with a demure smile and downcast eyes. But beneath that subservient exterior, her mind was constantly alert, her ears attuned to every whispered conversation, every hushed phone call. It was during one of these eavesdropping sessions that Amelia stumbled upon a truly shocking revelation. She was polishing the silver in the dining room when she heard Carlton's voice, raised in anger, coming from his study. "I don't care what it takes," he shouted into the phone. "I want those documents destroyed. If anyone ever finds out about the real cause of James and Sarah Foster's death, everything we've worked for will be ruined." Amelia's hand froze, the polishing cloth slipping from her grasp. Her parents' names. Carlton admitting to covering up their deaths. It was all she could do to stifle a gasp. As she stood there, reeling from the implications of what she just heard, a new voice joined Carlton's, one that sent a chill down her spine. Now, brother dear. Do try to keep your voice down. We wouldn't want the help overhearing anything incriminating." Amelia's blood ran cold. She knew that voice, it belonged to Vivian Blackwood. But she had called Carlton brother. Creeping closer to the study door, Amelia strained to hear more. "Don't lecture me, Vivian," Carlton snapped. "If it weren't for your idea to tamper with their brakes, we wouldn't be in this mess." "My idea?" Vivian's laugh was as cold as ice. "I merely suggested a way to solve our problem. You're the one who acted on it. And may I remind you, it worked. We got the inheritance, the company, everything. All it cost us was one meddlesome sister and her do-gooder husband." Amelia's world tilted on its axis. Vivian was her aunt? Carlton and Vivian had murdered her parents? It was too much to process, too horrific to believe. But deep in her heart, she knew it was true. As she stood there, frozen in shock, a floorboard creaked beneath her feet. The conversation in the study abruptly ceased. "Did you hear that?" Carlton's voice was sharp with suspicion. Amelia's heart pounded. She had to move, had to get away before. The study door flew open, revealing Carlton's thunderous face. His eyes widened as they fell upon Amelia, then narrowed dangerously. "You," he snarled. "What did you hear?" Amelia's mind raced. She couldn't let on that she knew the truth, not yet. Summoning every ounce of her acting skills, she affected a look of confused innocence. "I'm sorry, sir," she stammered. "I was just finishing the silver and I thought I heard raised voices." "Is everything all right?" For a long moment, Carlton studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. Finally, he seemed to relax, though suspicion still lingered in his eyes. "Everything's fine," he said curtly. "Finish your work and then take the rest of the day off. I have important business to attend to." "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir," Amelia murmured, bobbing a quick curtsy before hurrying away. It wasn't until she was safely in her tiny room that Amelia allowed the full weight of what she'd learned to crash over her. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to come to terms with the brutal truth: her own family had betrayed her in the worst possible way. But as the initial shock began to fade, a new emotion took its place, a burning, righteous anger. Carlton and Vivian had taken everything from her, her parents, her inheritance, her very identity. But they hadn't taken her spirit, her resilience, or her determination to see justice done. Wiping away her tears, Amelia reached for her phone. It was time to call Theodore. The game had changed, and they needed a new plan. As she waited for Theodore to answer, Amelia's mind whirled with possibilities. She had always known that exposing Carlton's corruption would be dangerous, but now the stakes were even higher. This wasn't just about saving Millbrook anymore, it was about avenging her parents and reclaiming her stolen legacy. "Theodore," she said when he finally picked up. "We need to talk. I've discovered something that changes everything." The next morning found Amelia back at work, her mind still reeling from the previous day's revelations. She moved through the manor like a ghost, mechanically performing her duties while her thoughts raced with plans and possibilities. As she dusted the library shelves, a familiar voice startled her from her reverie. "You missed a spot." Amelia turned to find Vivian lounging in an armchair, a glass of wine in hand despite the early hour. Her aunt's eyes gleamed with malicious amusement. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Amelia murmured, reaching to rectify her mistake. Vivian waved a languid hand. "Oh, don't bother. I'm sure you'll just mess it up again. Tell me, girl, do you enjoy working here?" The question caught Amelia off guard. I'm grateful for the opportunity, ma'am." "Grateful," Vivian repeated, her tone mocking. "How quaint. But surely a young woman like yourself has aspirations? Dreams beyond scrubbing floors and polishing silver?" Amelia's heart raced. Was this a trap? "I'm content with my work, ma'am," she replied carefully. Vivian's laugh was sharp and brittle. "Content? Oh, my dear, how very sad. But then again, I suppose some people are simply born to serve, aren't they? It's in their blood." The words hit Amelia like a physical blow. Vivian knew. She had to know. But why this game? Why not simply expose her? Before Amelia could formulate a response, the library door burst open and Carlton strode in, his face flushed with excitement. "Vivian! The mayor just called. He's agreed to fast-track the eminent domain process. The Harrison farm will be ours within the month." Vivian's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. "Excellent work, darling. I knew that little incentive we provided would do the trick." Carlton's gaze fell upon Amelia, as if noticing her presence for the first time. His expression darkened. "What are you doing here?" "This is a private conversation." Amelia bobbed a quick curtsy. "I was just finishing the dusting, sir. I'll leave right away." As she hurried towards the door, Vivian's voice stopped her cold. "Oh, and Foster? Do be a dear and bring us some champagne. I think a celebration is in order, don't you?" Amelia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As she left the library, she could hear Vivian's tinkling laugh and Carlton's smug chuckle. They were so close to destroying everything, the Harrisons, Millbrook, her parents' legacy, and they were reveling in it. But little did they know, their overconfidence would be their downfall. For as Amelia made her way to the wine cellar, her hand slipped into her pocket, pressing the stop button on the recording app of her hidden phone. She had captured every damning word. With hands that trembled only slightly, Amelia selected a bottle of champagne and prepared a tray. This might be Carlton and Vivian's celebration, but soon enough, she vowed, it would be their downfall. As she made her way back to the library, a plan began to form in Amelia's mind. She had the evidence now, not just of Carlton's corrupt land deals, but of her parents' murder. But evidence alone wouldn't be enough. She needed to force a confession, to make Carlton and Vivian reveal their true nature. When she entered the library, Carlton and Vivian were deep in conversation, their voices low and urgent. "Need to be careful," Carlton was saying. That nosy judge, Maxwell, has been asking questions again. Vivian scoffed. Let him ask. He has no proof, no. They fell silent as Amelia approached with the champagne. She kept her eyes downcast as she set the tray on a side table and began to pour. That will be all, Foster, Carlton said dismissively. But as Amelia turned to leave, inspiration struck. She deliberately stumbled, sending the champagne bottle crashing to the floor. Crystal shards scattered across the expensive Persian rug, champagne seeping into the delicate fibers. You clumsy fool! Carlton roared, leaping to his feet. Do you have any idea how much that rug costs? Amelia fell to her knees, frantically trying to mop up the spill. I'm so sorry, sir. It was an accident, I swear. Vivian's laugh was cruel. An accident? Oh, please. You did that on purpose, didn't you? A little act of rebellion from the downtrodden maid. How pathetic. Amelia looked up, allowing a hint of defiance to show in her eyes. I don't know what you mean, ma'am. Carlton grabbed her arm, hauling her to her feet. Don't play dumb with us, girl. We know you've been snooping around, asking questions. Did you really think we wouldn't notice? Amelia's heart pounded, but she held her ground. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a maid, remember? Born to serve, isn't that what you said, Mrs. Blackwood? Vivian's eyes narrowed. Careful, girl. You're treading on very thin ice. Am I? Amelia shot back, abandoning all pretense now. Or are you the ones on thin ice? I know what you did. To my parents, to the Harrisons, to this whole town. For a moment, shock flashed across Carlton and Vivian's faces. Then Carlton's expression hardened into a mask of fury. You little snake, he hissed. I knew we should have gotten rid of you years ago, just like we did your parents. Vivian laid a warning hand on his arm. Carlton, don't. But Carlton was beyond caution now, his face purple with rage. Shut up, Vivian. It's time this uppity little brat learned her place. You want to know the truth, Amelia? Fine. We'll give you the truth. He advanced on Amelia, his eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and something else, a perverse pride, as if he relished the opportunity to finally reveal his true nature. Your parents were fools, he spat. Self-righteous do-gooders who couldn't see the bigger picture. They were going to ruin everything with their ridiculous ethics and their community-first nonsense. Vivian stepped forward, her elegant facade crumbling to reveal the cold, calculating woman beneath. We gave them a chance to join us, to be part of something greater. But they refused. They were going to expose us, destroy everything we'd worked for. So we had to act, Carlton continued, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. It was so easy, you know. A little tampering with the brakes, a winding road on a rainy night. Accidents happen all the time, don't they? Amelia felt a surge of emotions, grief, rage, disgust, but she forced herself to remain calm. Every word they uttered was another nail in their coffin, and she needed to keep them talking. And what about me? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Why keep me around all these years if you hated my parents so much? Carlton's laugh was harsh and humorless. Insurance, my dear niece. As long as we had you under our thumb, no one would ever suspect us of harming your parents. Plus, watching you scrub floors and bow and scrape. Well, let's just say it was a particularly satisfying form of revenge. You're monsters, Amelia breathed, genuine horror in her voice. Oh, spare us the moral outrage, Vivian sneered. This is the real world, girl. The strong survive, the weak perish. Your parents were weak. And you're just like them. Carlton's hand shot out, gripping Amelia's arm painfully. And now, my dear, it's time for you to join them. Did you really think you could challenge us and walk away? You'll have an unfortunate accident, just like your parents. Such a tragedy, the whole Foster family wiped out. Amelia's heart raced, but she stood her ground. You won't get away with this. People know the truth now. People? Carlton scoffed. What people? That old fool Maxwell? He has no proof, no power. No one will believe the word of a washed-up judge and a servant girl over ours. Are you sure about that? A new voice rang out, strong and clear. All heads turned to see Theodore Maxwell standing in the doorway, his expression grim. Behind him stood Sheriff Johnson and 2 deputies, their faces a mixture of shock and determination. What is the meaning of this? Carlton blustered, releasing Amelia's arm. This is a private residence. You have no right. Oh, we have every right, Theodore interrupted, his voice cold. Especially when we have probable cause to believe a crime has been committed. Sheriff Johnson stepped forward, his hand on his holster. Carlton Blackwood, Vivian Blackwood, you're under arrest for the murders of James and Sarah Foster, as well as conspiracy, fraud, and a litany of other charges I'll take great pleasure in reading to you down at the station. This is absurd! Vivian shrieked. You have no proof. Amelia reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Actually, she said, her voice steady, we have all the proof we need. Every word of your confession is recorded right here. The color drained from Carlton and Vivian's faces as the realization of their situation sank in. In that moment, they looked small and pathetic, their power and arrogance stripped away to reveal the hollow, greedy creatures beneath. As the deputies moved to handcuff them, Carlton made one last desperate lunge at Amelia. You little witch, he snarled. I'll see you dead for this. But before he could reach her, Theodore stepped between them, his eyes flashing with anger. That's enough, Blackwood. It's over. You've lost. As Carlton and Vivian were led away, their protests echoing through the grand halls of Evergreen Manor, Amelia felt a wave of emotions wash over her. Relief, vindication, grief, and a bittersweet sense of triumph all mingled together, leaving her feeling drained but strangely light. Theodore placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You did it, Amelia. Your parents would be so proud. Amelia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Thank you, Theodore. For everything. I couldn't have done this without you. You're wrong about that, he replied with a warm smile. You're stronger than you know, Amelia Foster. Your parents' daughter through and through. As they walked out of Evergreen Manor, Amelia took one last look at the grand house that had been both her prison and the key to unlocking the truth. It was the end of one chapter, but she knew it was just the beginning of a new one. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. News of Carlton and Vivian Blackwood's arrest spread through Millbrook like wildfire, sending shockwaves through the community. As the full extent of their crimes came to light, people who had once fawned over the powerful couple now recoiled in horror. Amelia found herself at the center of a storm of attention. Reporters clamored for interviews, locals stalked her on the street to shake her hand or offer words of support, and officials sought her testimony for the upcoming trial. It was overwhelming, but Amelia faced it all with the quiet strength and dignity that had seen her through years of adversity. One crisp autumn morning, about a week after the arrests, Amelia stood on the porch of the Harrison farm, her heart pounding as she waited for someone to answer her knock. She had put off this moment, unsure of how to face the family whose livelihood she had inadvertently put at risk during her investigation. The door swung open, revealing the weathered face of old Mr. Harrison. His eyes widened in recognition. Miss Foster? What can I do for you? Amelia took a deep breath. Mr. Harrison, I owe you an apology. And an explanation. For the next hour, Amelia sat in the Harrisons' cozy kitchen, pouring out the whole story, her parents' murder, her years of servitude, and the complex web of deceit she had unraveled. She explained how the Blackwoods' plan to seize their farm had been the key that unlocked the entire conspiracy. When she finished, silence fell over the kitchen. Then, to Amelia's surprise, Mrs. Harrison reached out and took her hand, her eyes brimming with tears. "Oh, you poor dear," she said softly. "To think of all you've been through, all alone." Mr. Harrison nodded solemnly. "You've nothing to apologize for, Miss Foster. If anything, we owe you our thanks. Without you, we might have lost everything." Amelia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "I was so afraid you'd hate me for putting your farm at risk." "Hate you?" Mr. Harrison chuckled. "My dear, you saved our farm. You saved the whole town. You're a hero." The word made Amelia uncomfortable. "I'm no hero," she protested. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Mrs. Harrison said firmly. "You did what few would have the courage to do. You stood up to power and corruption, even at great personal risk. That's the very definition of a hero." As Amelia left the Harrison farm that day, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had faced one of her greatest fears and found not condemnation, but understanding and gratitude. It was a small step, but an important one on her journey to healing. The next few months were a blur of legal proceedings, community meetings, and long conversations with Theodore as they worked to undo the damage Carlton and Vivian had done to Millbrook. The truth about James and Sarah Foster's work to expose corruption came to light, and Amelia found herself the recipient of a posthumous inheritance that included not just wealth, but a legacy of integrity and community service. As winter gave way to spring, Amelia stood in the newly renovated town square, surrounded by the people of Millbrook. The occasion was the unveiling of a memorial to her parents, a small park with a plaque that told their story and honored their sacrifice. Mayor Thompson, newly elected after his predecessor's involvement in the Blackwood scandal came to light, stood at the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we are here today not just to honor James and Sarah Foster, but to celebrate the resilience and spirit of our community. We have weathered a storm of corruption and greed, but we have emerged stronger, more united, and more committed than ever to the values of honesty, integrity, and compassion." He turned to Amelia, a warm smile on his face. "And we owe much of this to their daughter, Amelia Foster. Amelia, would you do us the honor of unveiling the memorial?" As Amelia stepped forward, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the cord, she felt a surge of emotion. This moment wasn't just about her parents, or even about her. It was about the triumph of good over evil, of truth over lies, of community over greed. With a deep breath, she pulled the cord, and the cover fell away to reveal a beautiful bronze plaque set into a simple stone monument. The words engraved upon it brought tears to her eyes. "In memory of James and Sarah Foster. Beloved parents, dedicated citizens, tireless advocates for justice. Their light shines on through their daughter, Amelia. And through all who stand against corruption and fight for what is right." As applause broke out around her, Amelia felt a gentle touch on her shoulder. She turned to see Theodore, his eyes misty with emotion. "They would be so proud of you," he said softly. "You've honored their memory in the best way possible, by carrying on their work, by staying true to their values even in the face of overwhelming odds." Amelia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She thought of all she had endured, the years of servitude, the cruel treatment at the hands of Carlton and Vivian, the pain of discovering the truth about her parents' fate. But she also thought of the strength she had found within herself, the friends she had made, and the community that had rallied around her. As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Amelia found herself approached by a young woman she recognized as a reporter from the local paper. "Miss Foster," the reporter said, notebook in hand, "you've been through so much, and you've achieved an incredible victory. What's next for you?" Amelia paused, considering the question. In the months since the Blackwoods' arrest, she had given little thought to her own future, so focused had she been on setting things right in Millbrook. But now, standing in the warm spring sunshine, surrounded by the fruits of her labor, she felt a sense of possibility blossoming within her. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted with a small smile. "But I do know this: my parents dedicated their lives to making this community a better place, to fighting against injustice and corruption wherever they found it. I intend to continue that work, in whatever form it takes." The reporter nodded, jotting down notes. "Some people are calling for you to run for office. Is that something you're considering?" Amelia laughed softly. "I think I've had enough of politics for a while. But there are many ways to serve a community. For now, I'm focusing on setting up a foundation in my parents' name, one that will support investigative journalism, anti-corruption efforts, and community development projects." As the reporter thanked her and moved away, Amelia found herself approached by Mr. Harrison. The old farmer's eyes twinkled as he held out a small, wrapped package. "What's this?" Amelia asked, surprised. "Just a little something to say thank you," Mr. Harrison replied. "Go on, open it." Curious, Amelia unwrapped the package to reveal a beautiful, hand-carved wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a small golden key. "It's the key to our farmhouse," Mr. Harrison explained. "Mrs. Harrison and I, well, we're not getting any younger. We've been thinking about retiring, maybe traveling a bit. But we didn't want to sell the farm to just anyone. We want it to go to someone who understands its value, who'll cherish it and use it to do good for the community." Amelia's eyes widened as she realized what he was saying. "Mr. Harrison, I can't accept this. It's too much." The old farmer shook his head firmly. "It's not nearly enough, considering what you've done for us. Besides, we're not giving it to you outright. We want you to use it as the headquarters for your new foundation. A place where people can come together, where new ideas can take root and grow. Just like your parents would have wanted." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes as she looked at the key in her hand. It represented so much more than just a piece of property. It was a symbol of trust, of new beginnings, of the power of community to heal and transform. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling Mr. Harrison into a heartfelt hug. "I promise, I'll make you proud." As the day wore on and the crowds began to disperse, Amelia found herself drawn to the edge of town, to a small, overgrown plot of land she hadn't visited in years. It was the site of her parents' old bookshop, long since closed and fallen into disrepair. Standing before the boarded-up storefront, memories washed over her, the smell of old books, the sound of her father's laugh, the warmth of her mother's embrace. For so long, these memories had been tinged with pain and loss. But now, they filled her with a sense of purpose and determination. Theodore, who had followed her at a respectful distance, came to stand beside her. "Thinking of reopening the shop?" he asked gently. Amelia nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Not just reopening it. Reimagining it. A bookshop, yes, but also a community center. A place for lectures, for workshops on civic engagement, for after-school programs. A place where knowledge and compassion can come together to create real change." Theodore squeezed her shoulder approvingly. "Your parents would love that idea. And I think Millbrook needs it now more than ever." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the town, Amelia took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace and purpose settle over her. The road ahead would not be easy, there was still much healing to be done, much work to be undertaken. But for the first time in years, she felt truly, deeply alive. She thought of the humble, downtrodden maid she had been just months ago, and marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had faced her deepest fears, confronted powerful enemies, and emerged not just victorious, but transformed. Yet even as she stood on the cusp of a new chapter in her life, Amelia knew that the most important things hadn't changed. Her compassion, her integrity, her commitment to justice, these were the gifts her parents had given her, the true inheritance that no one could ever take away. As she turned to walk back into town, Amelia caught sight of her reflection in the dusty window of the old bookshop. The woman who looked back at her was not the meek, beaten-down servant she had once been, but a strong, confident leader ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. With a quiet smile, Amelia whispered to herself, "Mom, Dad, I hope I've made you proud. And I promise, this is just the beginning." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity as Amelia threw herself into her new projects with characteristic determination and compassion. The Foster Foundation, as it came to be known, quickly became a beacon of hope and positive change in Millbrook. The old Harrison farm, true to Mr. Harrison's wishes, was transformed into a vibrant community center. The barn was converted into a spacious meeting hall where town forums and educational workshops were held. The fields became community gardens, providing fresh produce for local food banks and teaching children about sustainable agriculture. But it was the revival of her parents' old bookshop that truly captured Amelia's heart. She poured her soul into restoring the building, preserving its charming original features while updating it to serve the needs of the community. The result was a warm, inviting space that seemed to hum with possibility. On the day of the grand reopening, Amelia stood before the freshly painted storefront, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. The sign above the door read Foster's Books and Community Center, a tribute to her parents' legacy and a promise for the future. As she cut the ribbon, cheers erupted from the gathered crowd. Amelia caught sight of familiar faces, Theodore beaming with pride, the Harrisons wiping away tears of joy, and countless townspeople whose lives had been touched by her story and her work. "Welcome, everyone," Amelia said, her voice clear and strong. "This isn't just a bookshop or a community center. It's a home for ideas, for dreams, for the spirit of connection and compassion that makes Millbrook special. My parents believed in the power of knowledge and community to change lives. Today, we honor their memory by carrying that belief forward." As people filed into the shop, exclaiming over the cozy reading nooks, the state-of-the-art computer lab, and the carefully curated book selection, Amelia felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Sheriff Johnson, his expression a mix of admiration and sheepishness. "Miss Foster," he began, "I owe you an apology. When you first came to me with your suspicions about the Blackwoods, I didn't take you seriously. I let their wealth and status cloud my judgment. If I had listened to you sooner..." Amelia shook her head, cutting him off gently. "What matters is that you did listen, Sheriff. When it counted most, you stood up for what was right. That's all anyone can ask." The sheriff nodded gratefully. "Well, I want you to know that things are going to be different from now on. We're implementing new training programs for the department, focusing on community engagement and ethical policing. And we'd like your input, if you're willing to give it." Amelia smiled warmly. "I'd be honored, Sheriff. Thank you." As the day wore on, Amelia found herself constantly amazed by the outpouring of support and enthusiasm from the community. Children gathered in the new children's corner for story time, teenagers huddled over computers in the tech lab, and adults engaged in lively discussions in the coffee shop area. But it was a quiet moment late in the afternoon that truly brought home the impact of what she had created. Amelia was straightening books on a shelf when she overheard a conversation between two elderly women in the next aisle. "You know, Martha," one was saying, "I haven't felt this hopeful about Millbrook in years. It's like a dark cloud has lifted." "I know exactly what you mean, Edna," Martha replied. "And it's all thanks to that Foster girl. To think of what she went through, and instead of becoming bitter, she turned around and gave all this back to the town. It's nothing short of miraculous." Amelia felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't done any of this for recognition or praise, but hearing the impact her work was having on people's lives filled her with a deep sense of purpose. As closing time approached, Amelia found herself alone in the shop, savoring the quiet after the excitement of the day. She ran her hand along the spines of the books, breathing in the familiar scent of paper and ink that had always reminded her of her parents. A soft knock on the door roused her from her reverie. She looked up to see a familiar face peering through the glass, Jack Spencer, her childhood friend who had moved away years ago. "Jack," she exclaimed, hurrying to let him in. "What are you doing here?" Jack grinned, pulling her into a warm hug. "Did you really think I'd miss the grand opening? I've been following your story in the news, Amelia. What you've done, it's incredible." As they settled into a pair of comfortable armchairs, Jack's expression grew serious. "I'm so sorry about your parents, Leah. If I had known what was really going on all those years ago." Amelia reached out, squeezing his hand. "There's nothing you could have done, Jack. What matters is that the truth finally came out. And now, we have a chance to build something positive from all of it." They talked for hours, catching up on lost time and sharing their hopes for the future. As the conversation flowed, Amelia felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the cozy atmosphere of the shop. She had forgotten how easy it was to talk to Jack, how his presence had always made her feel safe and understood. As the clock struck midnight, Jack reluctantly stood to leave. "I should go. You must be exhausted after today." Amelia walked him to the door, suddenly reluctant to see him go. "Will you be in town for long?" Jack hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Actually, I've been thinking of moving back to Millbrook. After hearing about everything that's happened, I realized how much I miss this place. And..." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "I missed you, Leah." A flutter of excitement stirred in Amelia's heart. "I missed you too, Jack. More than I realized." As they said their goodnights, the promise of a new beginning hung in the air between them. Amelia watched Jack walk down the moonlit street, a smile playing on her lips. It seemed that the bookshop wasn't the only part of her life entering a new chapter. The next few months flew by in a whirlwind of activity. The Foster Foundation grew rapidly, its influence spreading beyond Millbrook to neighboring towns and even catching the attention of state officials. Amelia found herself increasingly in demand as a speaker and consultant on community development and anti-corruption initiatives. But even as her professional life flourished, Amelia never lost sight of the personal connections that gave her work meaning. She made a point of being present in the day-to-day operations of the bookshop and community center, always ready with a kind word or a helping hand for anyone who needed it. Her relationship with Jack blossomed as well. As he settled back into life in Millbrook, taking a job as a teacher at the local high school, they found themselves spending more and more time together. Jack's steady presence and unwavering support became a source of strength for Amelia, helping her navigate the sometimes overwhelming demands of her new role. One crisp autumn evening, almost a year to the day since the Blackwoods' arrest, Amelia stood on the porch of the old Harrison farmhouse, now the headquarters of the Foster Foundation. She looked out over the fields, golden in the setting sun, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "Penny for your thoughts?" Jack's voice came from behind her as he joined her on the porch, wrapping a warm arm around her shoulders. Amelia leaned into him, smiling. I was just thinking about how much has changed in a year. Sometimes I still can't believe it's all real. Jack pressed a kiss to her temple. Believe it, Leah. You've worked so hard for all of this. You deserve every bit of happiness that's come your way. As they stood there, enjoying the peaceful moment, a car pulled up the long driveway. Amelia recognized it as Theodore's and went to greet him, curiosity piqued by his unexpected visit. Theodore emerged from the car, his face alight with excitement. "Amelia, my dear, I have news," he exclaimed as he approached. "I've just gotten off the phone with the governor's office. They want to use the Foster Foundation's model as a template for a statewide community renewal program. They're offering substantial funding and resources to help expand our work across the state." Amelia's eyes widened in shock. "Theodore, that's incredible. But are you sure we're ready for something on that scale?" Theodore's eyes twinkled. "My dear, if there's one thing I've learned over the past year, it's to never underestimate Amelia Foster. You've already accomplished more than most people do in a lifetime. This is your chance to take your parents' legacy statewide, maybe even nationwide one day." As the implications of Theodore's news sank in, Amelia felt a familiar mix of excitement and trepidation. The opportunity was enormous, but so was the responsibility. She turned to Jack, seeking reassurance in his steady gaze. "What do you think?" she asked softly. Jack smiled, squeezing her hand. "I think you're going to change the world, Leah. And I'll be right here, cheering you on every step of the way." Amelia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. This was more than she had ever dreamed possible when she first set out to uncover the truth about her parents. But as she looked at Theodore's proud smile and felt Jack's unwavering support, she knew she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. "All right," she said, her voice filled with determination. "Let's do it. Let's show the world what a community built on compassion, integrity, and justice can achieve." As Theodore began outlining the details of the governor's proposal, Amelia's mind raced with possibilities. She thought of all the lives that could be touched, all the communities that could be transformed. But more than that, she thought of her parents and the legacy they had left her, not just of wealth or status, but of unwavering commitment to doing what was right. In that moment, standing on the porch of what had once been a symbol of her oppression and was now a beacon of hope, Amelia felt the presence of her parents more strongly than ever before. She could almost hear her father's warm laugh, feel her mother's gentle touch on her shoulder. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart," she imagined them saying. "You've taken everything life has thrown at you and turned it into something beautiful. Never forget where you came from, but always keep moving forward." Amelia closed her eyes, letting a single tear of joy and gratitude slip down her cheek. "I won't forget," she whispered. "I promise." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Amelia Foster stood on the threshold of a future bright with promise. She had come so far from the downtrodden servant girl she had once been, but she carried the lessons of that time with her always, the strength found in humility, the power of perseverance, and the transformative nature of compassion. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles she might face, Amelia knew she was ready. For she had learned the most important lesson of all, that true wealth lies not in money or power, but in the lives we touch and the good we do for others. As Theodore continued to outline the grand plans for the future, Jack slipped his hand into Amelia's, a gesture of silent support and love. And Amelia, her heart full of hope and her spirit unbroken, stepped forward into the next chapter of her extraordinary journey. Epilogue, 5 years later. The grand ballroom of the state capitol buzzed with excitement as politicians, community leaders, and citizens from all walks of life gathered for a momentous occasion. Banners bearing the logo of the Foster Foundation hung from the walls, and at the center of it all stood Amelia Foster, poised and confident as she prepared to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, the governor's voice boomed through the speakers. It is my great honor to introduce a woman who needs no introduction. In just 5 short years, she has transformed the face of our state, bringing hope and renewal to communities that had been all but forgotten. Please join me in welcoming the recipient of this year's Humanitarian of the Year Award, Ms. Amelia Foster. As applause filled the room, Amelia took the stage, her eyes scanning the crowd and finding the faces that meant the most to her. There was Theodore, beaming with pride, and the Harrisons, who had become like second parents to her. And there, in the front row, was Jack, their wedding rings glinting in the light as he gave her an encouraging nod. "Thank you all," Amelia began, her voice clear and strong. "This award is not just for me, but for every person who has been part of this incredible journey. 5 years ago, we started with a simple idea that every community, no matter how troubled or neglected, has the potential for greatness. That with the right support, resources, and belief in the inherent goodness of people, transformation is possible." She paused, allowing her gaze to sweep across the room. Today, we've seen that idea become reality in over 100 communities across our state. We've seen failing schools turn into centers of excellence, abandoned main streets come alive with new businesses, and neighbors who once viewed each other with suspicion come together to build a brighter future. Amelia's voice softened as she continued, but our work is far from over. As we celebrate our successes, we must also remember those who are still struggling, still waiting for their chance at renewal. And we must remember that the true measure of our success is not in awards or accolades, but in the lives we touch and the hope we inspire. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small, worn photograph, the same one she had kept by her bedside all those years ago in the servants' quarters of Evergreen Manor. "This is a picture of my parents," she said, holding it up for the crowd to see. "They taught me that true wealth lies not in money or power, but in the good we do for others. Everything I've accomplished, everything the Foster Foundation has achieved, is built on the foundation of their love and their unwavering commitment to justice." Tears glistened in Amelia's eyes, but her voice remained steady. "To everyone who has supported us, believed in us, and worked alongside us, thank you. To those who are still struggling, still fighting for a better future, don't give up. Your story isn't over yet. And to my parents, wherever they may be, I hope I've made you proud." As Amelia concluded her speech, the ballroom erupted in a standing ovation. But even as she accepted the award and posed for pictures, her mind was already racing with plans for the future. There were still so many communities in need, so many lives waiting to be transformed. Later that night, as she and Jack walked hand in hand through the quiet streets of their hometown, Amelia felt a sense of peace wash over her. They paused in front of her parents' old bookshop, now a thriving hub of community activity. "You know," Jack said softly, "I don't think I've ever told you how proud I am of you, Leah. The way you've taken all the pain and hardship you've been through and turned it into something so beautiful, it's nothing short of miraculous." Amelia leaned into him, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's not just me, Jack. It's everyone, you, Theodore, the Harrisons, every person who's believed in what we're doing. We're all part of this miracle." As they stood there in the moonlight, Amelia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a downtrodden servant to a beacon of hope for an entire state, she had come so far. Yet in her heart, she was still the same Amelia, driven by compassion, guided by integrity, and always, always striving to make her parents proud. "So," Jack said, a hint of excitement in his voice, "what's next for the unstoppable Amelia Foster?" Amelia's eyes sparkled with determination. "Well, there's been some talk about taking our model nationwide. And I've been thinking, why stop there? There are communities all over the world that could benefit from what we've learned." Jack laughed, pulling her close. "Why am I not surprised? Amelia Foster, changing the world one community at a time. As they turned to walk home, Amelia cast one last glance at the bookshop. In her mind's eye, she could see her parents standing in the doorway, smiling proudly. She had taken their legacy and built something beyond anything they could have imagined. And yet, she knew that the most important things, the values they had instilled in her, the love they had given her, remained unchanged. Amelia Foster had once been a humble servant, downtrodden and alone. Now she stood tall, surrounded by love and purpose, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. For she had learned that true strength comes not from power or position, but from the unbreakable spirit within, a spirit tempered by adversity, fueled by compassion, and dedicated to the service of others. As she and Jack disappeared down the moonlit street, the gentle breeze seemed to whisper a promise that no matter how far her journey might take her, Amelia Foster would always remain true to her roots, to the values that had guided her through the darkest of times. The following morning, Amelia woke early, her mind already buzzing with ideas for the foundation's next steps. As she sipped her coffee on the porch of the old Harrison farmhouse, now her home, she watched the sun rise over the fields that had once seemed like a prison and now represented infinite possibility. Jack joined her, wrapping a warm arm around her shoulders. "Big day ahead?" Amelia nodded, leaning into him. "I'm meeting with the National Expansion Committee. If all goes well, we'll be launching pilot programs in 5 new states by the end of the year." "They'd be fools not to jump at the chance," Jack said, his voice filled with pride. "What you've done here, it's nothing short of revolutionary." Amelia smiled, but there was a hint of something else in her eyes, a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "It's funny," she mused, "I never set out to start a revolution. I just wanted justice for my parents, and to help people who were struggling like I had been. Sometimes I wonder if I'm getting in over my head." Jack turned to face her, his expression serious. "Leah, listen to me. You have a gift, not just for organizing and leading, but for inspiring people. You make them believe in themselves, in their communities. That's rare, and it's precious. The world needs more of what you have to offer." Amelia felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I couldn't do any of this without you, you know." As they shared a tender kiss, the sound of a car coming up the driveway broke the moment. They turned to see Theodore's familiar vehicle approaching. Well, Jack chuckled. "Looks like the day is starting early." Theodore emerged from the car, his face alight with excitement. "Amelia, my dear," he called out as he approached. "I hope I'm not interrupting, but I have news that simply couldn't wait." Amelia greeted him with a warm hug. "You know you're always welcome here, Theodore. What's got you so excited?" Theodore could barely contain himself. "I've just gotten off the phone with the United Nations Development Program. They've heard about our work here, and they're interested in adapting our model for use in developing countries around the world." Amelia's eyes widened in shock. "The UN? Theodore, that's incredible. But are we ready for something on that scale?" Theodore's eyes twinkled. "My dear, if there's one thing I've learned over these past years, it's to never underestimate the power of your vision. This is a chance to take your parents' legacy global, to touch lives on a scale we've never dreamed of before." As the implications of Theodore's news sank in, Amelia felt a familiar mix of excitement and humility wash over her. She thought back to the frightened, downtrodden girl she had once been, scrubbing floors in Evergreen Manor. If someone had told that girl that one day she would be considering a partnership with the United Nations, she would have thought them mad. And yet, here she was. Every step of her journey, from uncovering the truth about her parents, to bringing down the Blackwoods, to rebuilding Millbrook and beyond, had prepared her for this moment. Amelia turned to Jack, seeing in his eyes the same mix of awe and encouragement she had come to rely on. He nodded, a silent affirmation of his support. Taking a deep breath, Amelia squared her shoulders and smiled at Theodore. "Well then," she said, her voice filled with determination, "I suppose we'd better get to work. We've got a world to change." As they headed inside to begin planning this new, exciting chapter, Amelia paused for a moment on the porch. She looked out over the land that had seen her lowest moments and her greatest triumphs. In her mind's eye, she could almost see her parents standing there, smiling proudly. "We did it, Mom and Dad," she whispered. "We're going to help people all over the world. I hope you're proud." A warm breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of possibility. Amelia Foster, once a humble servant, now stood on the brink of changing the world. But as she turned to join Jack and Theodore, she carried with her the most important lesson of all, that true power lies not in wealth or status, but in the strength of one's character and the depth of one's compassion. The story of Amelia Foster, the downtrodden angel who rose from adversity to become a beacon of hope, was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. And as she stepped into this new chapter, she did so with the knowledge that no matter how far she went, she would always remain true to the humble, compassionate spirit that had seen her through her darkest hours. For in the end, it is not our circumstances that define us, but how we choose to rise above them. And Amelia Foster had risen higher than anyone could have imagined, carried aloft on wings of resilience, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to making the world a better place.